Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is a solo live stream today. It's an open Q&A session, and it's all about the differences between the books and the show. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be just exploring how the books might be different to the show, and also where there might be some similarities. The way that we're going to do this is the same way that we always do this. I've got some questions from my patrons. They're going to form the structure for this, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat. Obviously, if there are any super chats coming, then I will get to them as soon as I can, but I'll try and pick up as many questions as I can from the chat as it goes through as well. So just to get us started, we have question. So James Robertson over on Patreon says, does this mean you think that Bronn might not get Highgarden in the book? And Andrew Burnett over on Facebook, I spotted, said, I feel like Bronn of the Blackwater is more of a show character than a book character. Do you think he will get anywhere near having Highgarden or having a seat on the small council? Yeah, so this is one of the main points when George R.R. Martin has been asked about how is the show going to be different, and what did he tell them about how the books were going to end? What did he tell the showrunners? He was very clear that he explained the main beats of the story as he was saying it, and also what happened to the main characters, but not so much what he would consider to be the minor characters. And Bronn is one of these minor characters. So what happened on the show, we shouldn't necessarily take as what's going to happen in the books. Indeed, I suspect that it probably won't be what happens in the books. Now, they did deliberately keep Bronn in on the show because he was one of the few characters, as you got in towards the end of the show, the last season or two, one of the few characters who injected that kind of slightly more light-hearted approach to things. It wasn't all just very serious with him. He always had a joke for an occasion, and they liked that, and that was one of the reasons why they kept the character in. I think that Bronn will survive in the books. I don't think that he's going to rise up to effectively what he was probably the third most powerful person in the entire continent on the show after the king and the Hand of the King. He was the master of coin. He was the Lord Paramount of the richest region in Westeros. That I don't think is going to happen in the books. I think that he will be a character who survives. This is the main thing about the character, is that he is one of the few characters that we see who actually is a truly low-born character, only really accidentally got mixed up in what we see in Game of Thrones, and is a social climber. And I think that he will survive for that reason. I think he will end up, he's already effectively got himself a castle in the books. I think he will end up with a better castle. I still like the idea that he might end up with the twins in the books. That would work quite well. I think that the twins will be in need of a new owner, let's put it that way, in the books as they were in the show. So I think that's where we're going to be going with him. I don't think he's going to rise to the same heights, but I think that he is going to survive. Leathery Wings says, do you think King Bran the Broken will rule from King's Landing or somewhere else, like perhaps Harrenhal? I think this is a really good question. So there's two parts to this. The first one is the assumption in the question whether Bran will be king in the books as well as on the show. And I think the answer to that probably is yes. Now, the reason why I say that, there are two reasons why. The first is that Isaac Hempstead-Wright, the actor who played Bran, says that he was told by the showrunners that this came direct from George R.R. Martin as one of the key plot pieces. And as we know, the main characters, the main plot pieces are going to be roughly the same. The context might be different, but they are going to be roughly the same in the books as the show. So that's the first one. The second is that what we're seeing now, as the dust has settled after the show, people are starting to a reread of the books with the extra information we've got, and people are starting to see things that they didn't see before, bits of foreshadowing for it. Now, Aziz, who's been on here quite a few times on these live streams, I'm going to get him back on again quite soon. I hope to talk about this very issue. He says on his reread post watching season 8 that the amount of foreshadowing for King Bran is really quite huge. And I would trust what Aziz says. So yes, I think as sort of the first part of that, yes, I think that Bran will be king in the books as well as on the show. The question as to whether he might rule from somewhere other than King's Landing is a really interesting one. I think that the short answer is we're not going to see much of the what happens next in the books in the same way that we didn't really on the show. We had, the last third or quarter of the last episode was about what happens next with a scene of the first meeting of the small council and things like that. We're not going to see huge amounts in the books about what happens next either after Bran becomes king. The idea that he might have a rule from Harrenhal is an interesting one, because Bran perhaps would want to rule from somewhere where there is a weirwood tree, not just from King's Landing, where they do not. They do have a godswood, but it's got, I think it's an oak in there rather than an actual weirwood tree. So there's a good chance that he might do that and suddenly the either faces, the God's Eye Lake and Harrenhal will be a lot more important in the books than they were in the show. So yes, I think there's a chance that he might bring the center of Westerosi politics up to the sort of the actual center, the Harrenhal, God's Eye Lake area, simply so that he hooks up more easily to the Weirwood network. That makes an awful lot of sense to me. I don't think it necessarily will be like that. I don't think we'll necessarily see it, but it makes a huge amount of sense. Okay, so while I think of it, we did have a couple of super chats just before we went live. Rachel Martinez, thank you very much. I didn't see a question attached to that, but thank you very much, appreciate it. And Maura Lee, very generous super chat, thank you, saying, love your Traveller's Guide on Bravos and looking forward to more on the Time Machine on the Well Told Tale, as well as more on your Robert's Rebellion Tower of Joy series. Well, thank you very much. I'll talk about all of those things in a little bit. Just to say, on the Robert's Rebellion Tower of Joy series, I know a lot of people have been asking me about this. My next video is going to be that why did they fight at the Tower of Joy? Surely the Kingsguard who were there and Ned and his group, they all wanted the same things at that point. So why did they fight? I have now finished writing that video. So it's just a matter of me recording it and getting it uploaded and all the rest of it. Probably next week is what it's looking like, but it is now finished. So all those have been asking where we're at on it, that's what's going on. But thank you very much for those super chats. Just checking through the chat here. I'm just saying maybe leader of the Gold Cloaks for Bronn. Yeah, that's entirely possible. That would certainly suit where he's at. And Jeffrey Van Kel saying Bronn's true strength is fighting. If anything, he should be a military commander. Yeah, that seems to work. I think the idea that he's Master of Coin was as much to do with the fact that the show wanted to fill some spots on the small council rather than anything else. So, and they want a little bit of humor at the end of it, which they certainly got. So, yeah, that's where we're at. The capital H just in the chat saying, do you think the implication of King Bran is that he'll find Greenseers for his heirs? I don't think that's necessarily the case. But as I say, we're not going to see into the future here, that we're not going to have a 20 years later, 40 years later chapter. It's going to be very much focused on this is the story and the immediate aftermath, and this is this is where we're going to leave it. Once all of the storylines have reached some kind of satisfying conclusion, that's when the story will end. We won't get this kind of and so just so you know, what happens in the future of Westeros is these things. I don't think we're going to get that. Might Bran, however, decide that he wants Green Seers to always be in control? It's possible. It's possible. It really depends, and this is a big unknown, I think, on what the Weirwood Network and the sort of Bloodraven and the Children of the Forest as a whole, what do they want? Do they want to keep their grip on power? And if so, can they do that just through Bran, or do they have to try and keep up a pretense that he's a normal human? Can he become, I can't remember where I saw it, somebody mentioned it today, might have been on Twitter, this kind of God Emperor feel. Is that where they're going to go with this? Or where George R. R. Martin's going to go with this? It's entirely possible. And if you think about someone like Bloodraven, he is very old. He's 120 or so years old, and he's still being kept alive by the Weirwood tree. So the idea that Bran is just going to have a normal lifespan seems quite unlikely. He will probably rule for the next century or more. So yeah, that's the world we're looking at the moment, not just a world of is he going to pass stuff down to his own chosen successor? It's how long is he going to reign for? Okay, let's dip back into some questions from my patrons. Leathery Wings says, what role do you think Nymeria and her super wolf pack will play in the books? So for those who don't know, so Nymeria is obviously Arya's direwolf. She kind of set him free, or set her free, in the Riverlands, right in episode 2 of the show. And whereas on the show there was like a meeting way back in season 7, and not much happened after that. In the books, Arya's got a much stronger link across to Nymeria, this kind of like spirit link almost. When she sleeps, she has these wolf dreams, she connects with her and all the rest of it. And so when Arya comes back to Westeros, as I believe she will in the books, then I think there will be a meeting. I think that Arya's fate is a lot more tied in with her direwolf in the books than it was on the show. Her heading off to the west was nice and it was good in the show, but I think that there's still a very good chance that in the books her fate is actually tied up with her direwolf and walking into her direwolf. What happens, though, is what we've seen during this period of time when Nymeria has been roaming the Riverlands, that Nymeria has been building a super pack of wolves, not just dozens, but hundreds or even thousands of wolves following Nymeria. And I think that they will come when we get these final battles in the north. The wolves are perfectly suited to be fighting in the snow. They will be heading up north, I think, with Arya. And there was a deleted scene, or a scene they never shot, in the final battle in season 8, the final battle with the Army of the Dead, when a wolf pack attacks an undead dragon. I think that that is a hint that they wanted the wolf pack to be coming up north and fighting for the living, and I think that that will happen in the books in some way, shape, or form, but it will be connected in with Arya, not just randomly they came up north. Wingy, good question in the chat saying, do you think when Nymeria dreams, she has Arya dreams? That's entirely possible, yeah. And Phil H, in George R. R. Martin's words, you don't just hang a wolf pack on a wall and not use it. Yeah, exactly. So he has created this super pack. They will be involved, and they will be involved. I mean, the only other place I could possibly see them getting involved is getting vengeance upon the Freys. Because Nymeria has already been involved in saving Catelyn Stark, Lady Stoneheart. She dragged her out of the river so that she could be revived or brought back to life. So that's the only other place possibly is with the phrase, but I think it's most likely to be a battle up in the north. Howland's little sister says, I have book-related quandaries that I hope you can clarify. There are so many books related to the Game of Thrones world that I find it confusing. The plethora of titles I find are so confusing. What is the proper sequence of the titles? Also, I remember hearing about two people who were assistants to George R.R. Martin. What do they do as related to the writing of his books? So, yeah, I've seen a few people in the chat as well just saying, they're just starting to get into the books. There are 5 books in A Song of Ice and Fire so far. The books in order, so you have A Game of Thrones, then A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, A Feast for Crows, and A Dance with Dragons. So those are the 5 books. There are 2 more, apparently, which are going to be coming out. We're hoping for the Winds of Winter later this year, early next year, maybe. That's where we're looking for. We've got 5 books. The last couple of books are sometimes split into 2, depending on where you are in the world. But that is the main 5. Outside of that, we've got the Duncan Egg stories, which are stories set 100 years before Game of Thrones. So they're separate. They can be read separately. They're a very different style, very light, very readable. There are currently 3 novellas there. Now, they are generally collected under the title A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, those 3 stories. So that's them. We then get 2 quite large tomes, which are sort of histories of Westeros, pardon me, or of the world of Ice and Fire. One of them is called The World of Ice and Fire, and the other one is Fire and Blood, Part 1, which is the history of the Targaryens in Westeros. So both of those are written as history books within the world of Ice and Fire by maesters, effectively. Now, you're talking about the 2 assistants. Then what I'm assuming you're talking about are Elio and I've entirely forgotten her name for a moment, but it will come back to me, who are the people that George R.R. Martin worked with on the world of Ice and Fire. Now, they are his assistants is probably the wrong way to say it. Linda is the name. There we go. Actually, people are coming up with it in the chat. Thank you very much. So they co-wrote with him a lot of the world of Ice and Fire, and he refers to them as being his memory. So they're the people who have got all of the information about the world. They do not write any of the main stories, A Song of Ice and Fire and all the rest of it. They're not in the bubble of knowing what George R. Martin is planning for that, but in terms of what is in the world, they are the people that he works with closely. So that is where they are. I mean, I hope that's helpful. In terms of the books, though, the main A Song of Ice and Fire, there are 5 main books so far, planned for 2 more. And the first one to start with is A Game of Thrones, and just go from there. The other things add a lot to the world, but they're not necessary for you to be understanding the main plot of A Song of Ice and Fire. Wingy, thank you so much. A super chat, $10 saying, I enjoy your explanations, so take my money. Keep it up. Thank you. That's very kind of you. So Phil H says 5 novels, 3 novellas, and 2 history books is a good summary of where we're at. And we are going to get part 2 of Fire and Blood, that history of the Targaryens, at some point as well. So that's the other thing that we've been promised. Okay, so we've got Kraken Tacos saying Tyrion will probably lose his tongue. Yeah, I've not got any questions on Tyrion, so very happy to talk about this very quickly. Tyrion, I've mentioned this a few times before. There is a great video, and I'm not going to try and replicate it because, you know, when somebody does a good video, there's no point in me trying to add to it. If you go to Alt-Shift-X, which is an excellent channel, incidentally, you will find a video on there called something like "Will Tyrion Lose His Tongue?" And it comes from the idea that all of the Lannister siblings, they lose the thing that gives them their own personal value. So for Jaime, his own personal value came from how good a swordsman he was, so he loses his right hand. He can no longer be this great swordsman. With Cersei, where she got her own personal value from was her beauty, and whether or not she actually has been losing her beauty, she believes that she has. She's been getting older. She has been losing her beauty, and more beautiful women are appearing in court. For Tyrion, obviously, where he gets his own sort of self-esteem from is his ability to talk his way out of any situation. That then, if he's going to lose anything, is going to be the thing that he will lose, his ability to do it. There are plenty of people out there, including, of course, Euron, who like doing things like cutting people's tongues out. And given the amount of times it's mentioned in the stories, he has to do this to somebody who matters, really, I think. It's not just an interesting little bit of backstory about him, it's setting this up, foreshadowing, if you like, for him doing this to a character we care about. Now, I was wondering whether this might be Asha Yara, if he does capture her in the books as he did on the show. That would make a lot of sense to me. But Tyrion, if Tyrion happens to be there, there's a lot of sort of moving pieces as to why Tyrion might be in the same place as Euron. But if so, then yes, I think he's another candidate for who that is. Bear Island Josh, thank you so much, saying got to run but will listen tomorrow. No question. Well, thank you very much anyway. Vienna Wells, thank you so much for your super chat, saying hello from Madrid. Hi there, hola. A question: when Arya uses the cat's eyes, she is able to move. What kind of warging or skin change is that? Okay, so this is in Braavos. Now, when Arya is in Braavos, she takes on a number of different characters working for the Faceless Men. And during one of her times there, she appears to skin change in some way to be able to see through a cat's eyes. I think that it's, when you're saying she is able to move, I think this is not, it was a momentary going in and seeing what was happening rather than anything else. The writing wasn't very clear at that point. I think it was deliberately not clear on George R.R. Martin's part, but I think what he was trying to do was to show that Arya wasn't just a skin changer who had a magical bond with one wolf and that was it, and sometimes when she dreamed she would go along with it and she had no control over it, but actually she will learn to gain control probably during her time in Braavos. I think that was what he was trying to do, was trying to show us that actually she is more powerful than we think she is with this kind of skin-changing or warging ability. So I think that's what was going on there. As I say, it wasn't a very long and detailed section. I think George R. R. Martin deliberately left it vague, but I think that is where it's going to go, and we're going to find out more about that in The Winds of Winter. Incidentally, from the pre-release chapter of The Winds of Winter that features Arya, which was called Mercy. Pardon me. I did a recording of this. In fact, all of the pre-release chapters from The Winds of Winter, I've done recordings for my patrons. If you're interested in that at all, there's a link down there if you're interested in becoming a patron. But in the Mercy chapter, that actually opens once more with her having a wolf dream. So this isn't something that George R. R. Martin is going to drop. Arya's skin-changing and warging abilities are going to be important. They're going to carry on. It's not just about her becoming a kick-ass assassin as it was on the show. this is a key part. Her skin-changing identity is a key part to who she is and who she develops into in the books. But really good question. Maura Lee, thank you so much. Another very, very kind super chat saying birthday drinks on me at Con of Thrones. Thank you so much. Yes, my birthday is coming up, and I will be at Con of Thrones in a couple of weeks. For those who don't know, Con of Thrones is exactly what it sounds like, a convention for Game of Thrones fans. I'm going over there, and I will be meeting a huge amount of people that I only ever met online, and I'm really looking forward to it. And Maura, thank you so much. That's incredibly generous of you. Ariel Winchester says, what do you think Howland Reed's role will be in the book? Actually, I think that was a question that Maura asked me over on Patreon, so I shall answer this one now. So Howland Reed, George R. R. Martin has been very clear, will appear again in the books. In the show, they didn't really major on it at all, but he will appear again in the books. Now, probably not till near the end. There are 2 or possibly 3 ways that he's going to have an impact. The first one is the fact that he knows about Jon's true identity. So I think that whereas on the show, this was a combination of Bran and Sam, who sort of discovered and let people know, I think that this is going to be Howland emerging from the shadows. He is going to be the person who's going to be telling people. That's the first thing. The second thing is the fact that he is and has been for a long time, the man on the ground for Bloodraven. Bloodraven is kind of coordinating events and has been ever since the tourney at Harrenhal. He's been coordinating huge amounts of events down in Westeros. Probably the last video I do in my Tower of Joy series will be about Bloodraven and all of the events that he's been controlling and manipulating all the way through the backstory to this. And Howland Reed has been his point man. He's been the person, the man on the ground who's been doing all the dirty work. He will continue to do that even when, assuming it happens roughly the same way, even when Bloodraven's cave is overrun and Bran has to move down south. Howland Reed is probably going to see that as the moment at which he needs to sort of come out and start doing stuff. So those are the 2 main ways. I said 2, possibly 3. The third possible way is the fact that Howland Reed, as far as we're aware, is in the Neck, and that is a hugely strategically important place. It's preventing people from going north and south. So he, as the Lord of the Crannogmen, he actually has a way of preventing people from coming south or going north if he wants to, because they are masters in controlling who can get through that area. So if any army is trying to go one way or the other, then expect the Crannogmen to be playing a part in what's going on. Just to sort of tie all of that together, he may well appear relatively soon, perhaps even in the next book, because Robb Stark actually sent a couple of people off to try and find him. One of them was Mage Mormont, and so they've headed off to try and find him and sort of bring him into the fray. So he may well appear, head up towards Winterfell on the back of that. That's the fact that characters have been sent off to find him seem to suggest that he will eventually sort of come back in. So yeah, 2 or 3 different ways. I think he will be quite important in the story going forward. Shelley NY, thank you very much. Didn't see for the super chat. Didn't see a question. Oh, I think I can see a question underneath it actually. Says, will we get a Jon POV last chapter so we can know what he is thinking in the end? It was hard to interpret the show's last look back at the wall and that tiny smile. Yeah, probably. So I still buy into this idea. I like it a lot that he is the Frodo character who, at the end of all of this, he may well have played his part in saving the world against the forces that are seeking to destroy it, but the cost on him has been so great he cannot survive. He has to head off north, um, away from it all. So that works for me. In order for us to see that scene, we have to have a POV character there, and he's probably the only one. It makes sense that he might head off. I don't think it will be the final chapter. I think the final chapter will probably be a Bran one, which would be mind blowing. So we will probably have John going up there. The other way, as I say, going in with this idea of the last chapter being a Bran one, simply for the symmetry that the first chapter was Bran. I do wonder whether, if the last chapter is Bran, we do see him in this kind of God Emperor role and him seeing what's going on in the world, and he could see John heading north. So we might watch it without knowing what's going on in his mind. But yeah, I think probably we will. Probably he will head north, and probably, pardon me, probably what was going through his mind was exactly what we thought was going through his mind, that this world had been a huge burden to him. His role he had, everything he had to do was, it had weighed him down. And then suddenly he was joining the free folk. He was going north. He was leaving all responsibility behind him. He might be their leader, but he's only their leader because they're following him. He's not there expecting anybody to be kneeling to him or anything like that. So that is what the smile was, that he had achieved this freedom from the burdens that he'd been carrying around for so long. So I think that's what his enigmatic little smile was all about. Okay, let's go to another question from one of my patrons. In fact, actually, let's go to one I picked up on Facebook from Alejandro Juliao. Apologies for mispronouncing that. Saying, I may be mistaken, but rewatching the post-episode commentaries made me believe that the showrunners planned Dany's turn to the dark side as a plot twist from the start. So another season to build this moment, as I think should have happened, wouldn't have made any difference because building that was never in any plans. So the reason I picked up on this one in particular, I think it's a really interesting point. The fact that Dany is going to do some version of what she did, I think I'm reasonably sure on. It won't be the same circumstances, it won't be the exact same thing going on, but I think that her giving in to fire and blood in some way and doing something that lots of people find considered to be an atrocity in some way, I think that will happen. There may be more justification for it and all the rest of it, but be that as it may, the point in that you're making with the showrunners, I think, is the interesting one, because the showrunners, although they did build up to it, and we can't pretend that they didn't build up to it. The amount of times she said she wanted to burn a city to the ground is, pretty astonishing. I still defy people to find any city she spent any significant amount of time in that she did not say she was going to burn to the ground. But although they built up to it, they wanted it to be a twist. They wanted it to be a shock and a surprise. That is one of the things that it was very clear from reading the commentary that they did on it. One of the things that they valued as a storytelling device was the instrument of shock and surprise. And this is why we saw stuff like Arya with the Night King just suddenly appearing, because they wanted us to be surprised by what happened. Similarly, what happened with Dany, they wanted that to be a surprise because she'd been one of the good characters, so to speak. So yes, I think that's very true. The way that they were doing it, they were always going to try and make that a shock when it happened and a surprise. What I and many others I know are coming to the general view on is that the biggest concern with season 8 was the pacing, and they didn't build up to events enough, and they didn't allow us to see things sort of slowly evolve, which meant that actually the payoff of those things didn't have as much emotional impact. By which I mean Danny and John's relationship. Actually, when you break down to their normal relationship, when they were a couple before he suddenly realized that she was his aunt, actually, we only had about 2 or 3 scenes, half an episode of them as a couple, which wasn't enough for us to buy into them as a couple. So the emotional payoff about what happened later with them wasn't so great. I think that was the concern, is that those kinds of things weren't played out long enough, and that meant that the emotional payoff wasn't as great as it could have been. Just having a quick flick through some of the chat, saying Ricard Redelinguis, I completely mispronounced that, apologies, but saying George R. R. Martin will not change the big things, but his writing will be great, so we'll be satisfied. I think that's right. He said that the big beats will be the same. And incidentally, this is probably worth me saying, I am going to do some videos on this. I'm going to do at least 2 videos on the main things that I think will be the same and the main things that I think will be different. And George R. R. Martin has said a few things himself that we can be quite clear. One of the things that he's emphasized is that the fact that there are a lot of characters in the books that aren't in the show, and a lot of characters that are alive in the books that were dead by that point in the show. And therefore, there's a huge amount of extra story going on that just simply wasn't in the show. And so those bits are going to be different, and those things will have an impact on what is going on. And we'll come to it in just a moment. James Sidney, your comment over on Patreon about the iteration of events with young Griff, or Aegon VI, or Fagon, or whatever you want to call him, who is a book-only character, is going to be hugely significant in what happens in King's Landing, and with a huge amount of the characters who are based around the South over the course of the next book or so. So I'll read out, James, I'm afraid I haven't got time to read all of your thoughts, but the first half of it, you're saying, on the King's Landing front, Fagon and the Golden Company, this is what you think will happen, will overthrow Cersei with the help of Varys' knowledge. Daenerys and co will battle Fagon for King's Landing. John Connington will have serious PTSD with the ringing of the bells. Grayscale will play a larger part, thanks to John Connington. Dany will try and tactically use her dragons, but they'll accidentally light old caches of wildfire. And John will be forced to execute a regretful Dany to seal the peace of the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. I think there's a lot of really good thinking in there. I think what I would definitely pick up on is this idea that Fagon has launched an invasion already that is now very close to King's Landing. He has got the Golden Company with him, who, although on the show they didn't look all that good, are actually an incredibly powerful force. And yes, they probably do have elephants. So he's got them. He's almost certainly, I think, going to get Dawn on side as well. And there's a very good chance that they might, as you say, with Varys' inside knowledge, Varys is already in there trying to destabilize the powers that be. He's just been killing Kevin Lannister, who he basically apologized to and said, the only reason I'm killing you is that you're competent, and I can't have competent people here right now. So that all seems to be paving the way for Fagon to be attacking King's Landing. Daenerys will come over with her invasion fleet at some point, but that's still a few months away. She's still lost over in the Dothraki Sea, so she needs to get all the Dothraki, then get back to Meereen, sort out what's going on there, then get her fleet across. This is a matter of quite a few months. So Fagon has got a huge advantage. He will go in, and I think he will manage to kick the Lannisters out, as you say, from King's Landing. Grayscale is John Connington has got Grayscale. I think there's a very good chance that Grayscale may then overcome the city. If Daenerys is then going to be exposing Fagon for being not a Targaryen, that's going to happen by battle. The chances are that is the time that she will be doing whatever she does with fire in King's Landing. And I think that the fact that there are still wildfire caches, again, that has to be pointing to something. They have to come into the plot at some point. So that is the general gist of what's going to be happening at the beginning. Whether or not this goes to Jon having to execute her to seal the peace of the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, I don't know whether that's the next step, because at that point, the attention will have to turn to the north and what's going on up in the north. So there's a shift, as there was on the show. The shift has to come to focusing up on the north, and then in the way that George R.R. Martin describes it, in a scouring of the Shire kind of way, once everything has been dealt with in the north, then we have to just deal with what's left down south. Perhaps what happens is that Daenerys, having kicked Aegon out, has to abandon the south and go north, allowing Cersei and Euron to retake King's Landing, and then we have them returning back down south afterwards. Perhaps that's the way it's going to be going. But there's a lot of plot to work our way through, and I think that speculating on the exact iteration of those events is still slightly ambitious at the moment, it has to be said. I think we can see the iteration of the early events, but the further on we get, it's the harder we get to it. Leon Gerhardt says, what's with Samwell? In the series, we see him as a Grand Maester. In fact, he isn't one, but he is the last representative of House Tarly. Will this be the same in the books as well? So I think that there's a good chance that he will be promoted within the Maesters at the end of it all. I don't think he's going to go back and rule House Tarly. That's not really where his heart is. His heart is with learning. He wanted to go off to be a Maester, and then he got sent up to the wall. And so really, this is where his heart is, to be a Maester. So I think that's where he's going to end up. Whether he gets made Grand Maester when he won't have all the links in his chain is another matter entirely. But the choice of who is Grand Maester effectively is the king's choice. So if Bran wants him to be Grand Maester, then he will be Grand Maester, and that's the way that this is going to roll. So I don't see him going back to being House Tarly. I can't see him going back up to the wall. I could see him being some sort of Maester, and frankly, we will need somebody to try and modernize is the wrong word for it, but to try and change how the Maesters work, because at the moment they have just too much power, and I suspect that Bran will be very aware of that. Okay, so let's just have a quick flick through super chats. I think we got one more from Donna Daly. Thank you, Donna, saying Arya can skin change cats as well as her wolf, Bran people as well as his wolf, Jon his wolf and dragons ? So Bran can skin change not just people and wolves, but obviously also birds and probably a variety of other things. We know from the books there's a character called Verimir Sixskins who has got a whole variety of different animals that he can walk into. Skin changing is not just limited to one animal, generally speaking. Yes, you kind of form a bond with the one animal, particularly with the warging elements, is just with a wolf, but having the ability generally means that you can skin change into other things if needs be. Doesn't come naturally, but there's no reason why not. Now, the question whether Jon can skin change into a dragon, I think this is quite hard. I think a lot of people for a long time have been asking, because there was a whole load of people a while ago who were suggesting that Bran was going to ride a dragon. This was, as far as I could tell, based on this you will never walk again, but you will fly idea, that perhaps he was going to skin change into a dragon. So my answer generally to this idea about Jon is the same as it was with Bran, which is that I think that dragons are magical, intelligent creatures, and it would be very hard for you to be able to do that. You seem to be able to, the Targaryen Valyrian part of his character will have a better chance of bonding with a dragon, but that's a very different thing to skin changing. Skin changing, as far as we can see and understand, is going into, we see it exactly with Hodor, going into the mind and effectively taking control. Now, that's not what happens with dragons. With the bond with dragons is that you just form a close bond and go from there, but you do not control the dragon. And I suspect that if a dragon thought that it was being controlled, then it wouldn't take it too well. So I hope that one answers there. Igreet Weirwood saying, does the dragon warg the rider? No, it doesn't work the other way around. I don't think it's that. It's a bond. It's a different thing to warging to skin changing. And I think because they are a magical animal, that's why there's a bigger difference. Bridget Walsh, thank you so much for the super chat, says, when Lady dies, this is Sansa's direwolf Lady, when Lady dies, does that mean Sansa will, or did it symbolize the death of innocence instead? Thanks for the great work. You're very welcome. So to my mind, the foreshadowing that comes from the direwolves is in their names, not in the fates of the individual direwolves. So the names, I mean, the classic example is Jon. So Jon's direwolf is called Ghost because he is going to die and come back again, like ghosts do. You get Shaggy Dog being Rickon's direwolf. That's, Shaggy Dog story is a long and rambling tale with no real or a slightly underwhelming ending to it, which seems to be the story of Rickon. So it seems that their names are the foreshadowing for what's happening. Bran, by implication, will have a very strong link to bringing about summer, the end of the long night, the end of the long winter. Sansa, her foreshadowing comes from the name Lady, which I think is foreshadowing, as we saw on the show, for her being the Lady of Winterfell. That, I think, is what the link is. The fact that Lady died does not mean that Sansa herself is going to be killed early on. She wasn't, and I don't think she will be killed in the books. I think she's going to survive again in the books. But in terms of death of innocence, yeah, obviously her character does move through this kind of she does have a long drawn out death of innocence as a character, but I don't think that that's linked across in terms of foreshadowing from her direwolf. G. Joe, thank you very much for the super chat, saying, I think Jon's true identity will be important, not for the throne, but for the White Walkers. What do you think? I mean, I don't know if this is a link across to Joe Magician, who's been on here a few times. He's got a theory, a very well worked through theory, that the White Walkers or the others were searching for Jon in some way. And so what we actually saw, go to his channel for the videos on this one, but what we saw in the prologue was actually them hunting for Jon, and the character that they discovered, Waymar Royce, looked a bit like him and could have been him, but they discovered that it wasn't him, and they were disappointed because they were wanting to kill him. So in terms of the question of whether or not it matters more for the White Walkers than for the throne, I think what it matters in as much as two elements, both of them. For the throne, it means that people will start rallying behind Jon if they discover who he is, in the same way as happened on the show. That will almost certainly happen in the books. People will see Jon once they discover that he's a Targaryen and potentially the heir and all the rest of it. They will rally behind him, whether he wants them to or not. So that, I think, is definitely going to happen. In terms of whether it's important for the White Walkers, I think that the issue here is that he is being set up as the balance. This is the way that George R. Martin seems to be doing it, is that this is going to sound like a slight digression, but I think it's quite an important one. One of the things I think the show did quite well was remind us, season 8 did quite well, was remind us that this is a Song of Ice and Fire. Is not just a battle against ice. This was about two forces. George R. Martin's been very clear on this from the beginning. Two forces, both of which could destroy the world: ice and fire. And so the first half of season 8 was very much about the battle against ice. The second half of it was about fire. And so it's how do we prevent both of these forces from destroying the world? And Jon is figuratively the balance between the two, because he is ice and fire, both Stark and Targaryen. So that is what his role is this kind of balance. So I think that he will play a key role in what happens with the others, with the White Walkers. He will also play a key role in what happens with the dragons and fire. And he will emerge at the end of it not as this great heroic king, but as somebody who has been broken by this process and has to leave. So we are not going to see this great hero's journey completing of Jon, who is, let's face it, set up to be the ultimate hero. He was this orphan child who grew up not knowing that who his parents were, that really he was secretly the heir to the land, that secretly he was the child of prophecy, that secretly this and all the rest of it. We're not going to see him go through this classic journey. George R. R. Martin is not going to take us through that. He's going to build it up and then show that actually that's not where Jon's going to end up. He's going to abandon this at the end of it. So that is where I see him. And so is he important for the White Walkers? Yes, but he's also important for the dragons. He's important in pushing back both of the forces that could destroy the world. That's the sort of the balance that we're trying to get through here. Okay, let's go back to another question from one of my patrons. So Ali Al Muhana, you had quite a few questions, some of which, just for the sake of brevity, some of which I've done videos on. So things like the Horn of Winter. Do go and check out my Horn of Winter video there. So for the sake of brevity, I'll just answer the ones that I haven't covered elsewhere here. all done specific videos on. But you asked about whether Daenerys will go to Ashai and what might she learn there. This is coming from Quaithe. So Quaithe is a much bigger, more important character in the books. She meets Dany in Qarth in the same way she does in the show, but she keeps on coming back to her in dreams and visions, and she's always kind of reminding her, remember who you are, just encouraging her to re-embrace her Targaryenness and fire and blood and things like that. So she's really important. What she says to Dany in this kind of enigmatic way is this whole series of things that she must do. To go west, you must go east. And Dany's there going, well, what's east? Ashai? Do I have to get to Ashai? So that is why some people think that Dany might have to go to Ashai. I don't think she will. So that was east from Qarth, where she has been in Meereen. If you go sort of northeast, you end up in Base Dothrak, which is where she is going in the books. That's where she went on the show. That's where she's going in the books. But it's basically... it's as well as literally going east in order to end up going west to conquer Westeros. She's also figuratively having to go back to where she started. That's what the kind of the literary thing of her going to face Dothrak. That was where her original fate was supposed to be. Once Khal Drogo had died, that's where she was supposed to have gone. And so the idea is you go back to where you were. And then, as we saw on the show, she will gather together Dothraki, and that will be the moment at which she climbs back up and moves forward. So she has to go backwards to where she had been in order to go forward. So that is the whole idea. I don't think she's going to go to Ashai, and I think that George R. R. Martin has confirmed that we're not going to go to Ashai in the books. How could Jon Snow's parentage be proven to the realm? I think that I mentioned this earlier, actually, with Howland Reed. I think that's probably where he's going to come from. He will be a person who will be a witness. He will know what is there, and he will be somebody who, as a lord, people will take his word seriously. And also, incidentally, they will know. It will be known that he was the only other person to survive what happened at the Tower of Joy. So, with Ned gone, he is the only witness who's still there. And then you ask, what might Jon lose after being resurrected? This is an excellent question. So George R. R. Martin has talked about Beric, who was resurrected 6 times, as being foreshadowing or a proof or a hint of what will happen to Jon. Now, Jon in the books has just been killed, so we know that he's going to die and he will come back. The issue is, of course, is with people who die and are brought back in the way that we seem to think that Jon will. They lose parts of themselves. Beric Dondarrion, tragic figure, he loses, every time he comes back, he loses a bit more of himself, not just physically, but in terms of his memories, in terms of his experiences, that he says he no longer enjoys food. He can't remember the name of the woman that he used to love. It's just like bits of him disappear each time he's brought back. And of course, Lady Stoneheart, who's also brought back, has lost huge amounts of her original character. All that is left of her is this desire for vengeance. And so she has lost a huge amount. So the question is, what is Jon going to lose? Now, I subscribe to this idea that actually we're going to see a different sort of resurrection for Jon. It will probably be done in the same way in terms of Melisandre will probably bring him back, but instead of his spirit sort of having gone away and bits of it lingering, which seems to be the main what's happening with everyone else, I think that he will warg into ghost and then have to be called back into his own body. So he will not lose things in the same way that Beric Dondarrion lost things and so on. So I think that, yes, perhaps a part of him will go and perhaps he will have a slightly more wolfish nature when he returns. But I don't think that he's going to be it's going to be an exact match for what happened with someone like Beric Dondarrion, for example. Okay. Donna Daly, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, from what you were saying earlier about Phagon and Grayscale, my mind went on a tangent. Do you think Phagon could be exposed by getting Grayscale? This is a really interesting one. So Grayscale has a history. I at some point I'm going to do a video about Grayscale because it's something which wasn't really developed on the show with all the background detail that we have. So this was originally what was left of the remnants of some kind of great magic that was cast back in the day when the Valyrians were trying to conquer an area, and it was sort of the remnants of this seemed to be Grayscale. This was the Royne in the around the River Royne and things like that. So what we're left with is this disease. Now, this disease affects a lot of different people, and it does seem to be that although Targaryens, the Valyrians, seem to be immune to many diseases, Grayscale does seem to be something that they might be slightly more vulnerable to, which kind of ties in with this idea of that it was some sort of magical weapon to be used against them. So I don't think it's necessarily how he's going to be exposed as being a fake Targaryen. I think that will come probably with his contact with dragons and the fact that the dragons kind of will reject him in some way. I think that's probably the way he's going to be shown. And incidentally, this idea that he's going to be exposed as a fake Targaryen comes from Dany's visions in the books in the House of the Undying. That's where that all comes from, that she will expose him as being a false Targaryen. I think the Grayscale is going to be more a matter of this is something which is going to be just ripping through King's Landing, and it's just going to turn King's Landing into a horrific place. And they have to come up with ways to prevent it. There's lots of stuff in Fire and Blood about diseases ravaging cities, and what do the rulers do? There seems to be no real good or right answer, but sort of quarantining the city does seem to prevent it spreading, but obviously the people don't like that. And James Sidney, we were talking earlier about your thoughts about what might happen. It certainly makes sense that Dragonfire to destroy people with Grayscale might be a rather drastic answer to how to stop the spread of it. It's tough and probably not the kind of thing we would say is a good idea. But if you're trying to save the city, getting rid of Grayscale is something you would have to do. So that's more where I see it going. And yes, I think it kind of makes sense, this idea of that she might accidentally set fire to some more things through wildfire, but we'll see. Nina Laboy, thank you so much for the super chat. Didn't see a question attached to that one. I just see a comment saying your videos have been a great joy to experience. Thank you so much. That's very kind. And something saying, how will Jon Snow's life progress? I think this depends on whether you mean sort of after the sort of show are finished or not. Certainly, I think that a lot of his story is going to be quite similar. There will be lots of complications and iterations. I think one of the questions later is about Stannis. I think Stannis will survive for a bit longer. That's going to impact on things. Jon, one of the first things that he will find when he is brought back is a fake Arya has been presented to him. This was the person who was married to Ramsay Bolton, and in the books, Sansa in the books, this is a fake Arya who was married to Ramsay Bolton and freed by Theon, and then Stannis, and she's been sent up to him. So there's that. I think that he will end up going to Winterfell, and I think that there's a good chance that he will end up being King of the North in some way, which will require Stannis to die. So I think Stannis will survive for a little while, but not forever. I think he will indeed remain to be King of the North. I think there will be some sort of love affair with Dany. He's got a lot of plots still to get through. And I think he will end up killing Dany. So I think that is the broad beats of the story that we saw on the show are what's going to be happening in the books, I think. In terms of what happens afterwards, yeah, I think he will go north. And I think actually he will just live out a happy life ranging in the north and with the free folk. I think that that's where his spiritual home will become. And I think that is, we don't need to know the details of it. We just need to know that that is where he is heading. So yeah, George R. R. Martin's not going to give us the fine detail about what happens afterwards, but yeah, John will find peace. Ultra violence, Jeff Burst, yeah, I picked up on the question from Nina. Thank you very much. Ultra violence saying, hi, might be a stretch. Is it possible Varys had some faceless man training? If so, could he be tied in with them and their dragon egg plot? I don't think so. I think it is a stretch. So Varys did move around the 3 cities in his youth, but I personally take to the accounts that he gave, which seemed to be reasonably backed up, that he sort of grew up on the streets, and then he sort of, after what happened with the magician, the sorcerer, and the brazier and the blue fire and all the rest of it, after that he worked his way up, met Illyrio, and they formed a partnership, and then he sort of gained in sort of strength and knowledge and all the rest of it, and then he came to the attention of Aerys II. That seems to make sense. He's not really done anything that would suggest that he has particular contact with the Faceless Men or he's working on their agenda in any way. The only thing that kind of works is he does use a lot of disguises, but that fits in with the idea that he grew up as part of a mama's troop. So I don't think that there's anything extra there that we need to explain by saying that he's working with or had training from the Faceless Men. I think the fact that he is who he says he is would explain everything that's there, if that makes sense. So it's a nice idea, but I can't see that I can't see that we need it to make sense of his character. Okay. Let's oh yeah, Bridget Walsh just spotted saying, I love that little sprout popping up. It was great for the show and a kind of redeeming. Yeah, so for those who didn't spot it, that last scene with Jon when he's heading up north with all the free folk, then they go past and you just see a first shoot of something green sprouting up to show that this is them, this is the return of spring, it is the dream of spring. And that I thought that was really well shot, that last scene, because they actually mirrored the prologue. If you look back at the prologue, you get, it's shot for shot in many bits. You get the shot of like the cage of the gate leading to the tunnel through the wall. You're looking through it, sort of like the lattice work there. Then you see them coming out, going through the trees. It's exactly the same as those 3 members of the Night's Watch in the prologue to season 1. As they are heading out, though, the whole point there is that you see that is the point at which we first see the others, the White Walkers, and we first see them bringing the winter. We first see them that they are there killing the free folk, the wildlings. And so that is mirrored in the final scene with John when he's leading the free folk back. The threat that had been facing them ever since the very first scene of the show has now ended, and so he's leading them back out. So I thought that was a really good scene, and the fact that there was just that little sprout coming out, I thought worked really well. Yeah, I agree. Maura Lee, thank you so much. I said I was going to come back to your... I can't see whether you're still in the chat, incidentally, but I said I was going to come back to talk about the Traveller's Guide to Braavos and also the Well-Told Tale. So Traveller's Guide to Braavos is carrying on. It's the Traveller's Guide to Essos. It was Westeros. We've got 2 or 3 more weeks in Braavos still. There is so much to be discovering there. So there's going to be another episode coming out tomorrow, and then every Friday. And after Braavos, we'll work our way through all of the free cities. So we've got at least another half a year, I think, of the Traveller's Guide through Essos to be looking forward to. In terms of the Well-Told Tale, apologies, I know that I've been slightly late in getting the episodes up. The final episode, episode 5 of the Time Machine, is almost ready, so I'm going to get that up as soon as I can. After that, the next one, incidentally, if you don't know, my second channel, The Well-Told Tale, is me. It's my audio narration channel. I'm reading what I consider to be the finest science fiction fantasy stories ever written. So if you just want audio narration, audio books, then please do check out The Well-Told Tale. Link down in the description. But after that, we're going to be doing another H.P. Lovecraft story at the Mountains of Madness, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think that's probably going to be 4 or 5 weeks worth. I'm going to get back into a weekly schedule, so it's going to be every Wednesday. Starting next Wednesday, we're going to be working every single Wednesday, so it's back on a weekly cycle. Apologies, as I say, for the couple of weeks off I've had, but we'll be back in a weekly cycle again from there. So that's stuff that's coming up. But Maura, you also had a couple of questions that I'll get to. One was about Dragonbinder, saying, I'm curious about the role that Dragonbinder will play. Victarion is currently in possession, and Danny is also interested in the horn. Who do you think will ultimately claim it? Who will blow it? How effective will it be? And so on. For those who don't know, because it didn't appear at all in the show, Euron had control of a magical horn called Dragonbinder, massive thing that he claimed could control dragons. And it quickly became apparent that this killed whoever blew it, but you could bond it to a person, and then once it was blown, that person would then be able to control the dragon. So he used this in the Kingsmoot initially just to sort of attract attention, but then he's given it to Victarion, who's a show-only character, but he's a great character, not the sharpest pencil in the rack, but he's a good character to read. He's headed over with a huge chunk of the Iron Fleet over to Slaver's Bay, to Meereen, and he has got this, and Euron's plan appears to be that Victarion will blow it, or he'll get somebody else to blow it, and this will bind the dragons to Euron, and then Euron will have control of the dragons. So that seems to be the plan. Victarion thinks this is the plan, but he's also planning on double-crossing Euron and being in control of the dragons himself. and they have literally just arrived as a battle is happening around Meereen. So it's a big, quick-moving, fast-moving kind of situation that's going on there. The Daenerys issue comes because at the end of Dance with Dragons, so the last chapter we have of her, she absent-mindedly thinks about how Drogon just flew her off and she couldn't into the Dothraki Sea and she couldn't control him. And hey, didn't the Valyrians used to have these magical horns that could control their dragons for them? So she's just thinking about, entirely coincidentally, thinking about, oh, wouldn't it be great if I had a magical horn that could control these dragons that I own? So the question is, what's going to happen? Now, the character who, another book-only character who is, I think, the wild card in this is a guy called Mokoro, who is a red priest, one of the Melisandre's lot, the red priests of R'hllor. He has attached himself to Victarion, but he is on a mission, a secret mission, to help Daenerys, because they believe that Daenerys is the Azor Ahai reborn. So Victarion's plan will not work. Mokoro has been the person who's been advising him. There's no way on this planet that Mokoro wants Victarion to be stealing Dany's dragons. So that whole thing is not going to work. I think Euron's part of it is also therefore not going to work. The horn itself, I think, will end up in the possession of Daenerys when she comes back with Drogon, as she inevitably will. I think that it's going to end up with her, and she is going to be able to use this to control her dragon. Now, it's a bit of a long shot, and I don't know whether this is going to be what's going to happen with it. But it's been very noticeable that in the Fire and Blood Part 1, George R. R. Martin made a point of showing us that Silverwing, a dragon, did not want to cross or could not cross the wall. And if Daenerys is going to go anywhere near there in the books, then she will need some way of controlling her dragon to force it to go north of the wall, if that's what she wants. So I think that this could be a way for her to do that. Long story short, Victarion's plan may not work. Euron is doing some crazy magic, so he may well have yet another way around this that we don't know, but eventually the horn itself will end up in Daenerys' possession, and she will need it to be able to control her dragons. Okay, then we have oh wow, Vienna Wells, thank you so much. There's a very generous super chat. Seven doubts that Jon really died. He didn't feel the knife, and then the cold was probably already washed. But if Jon is dead, he will now live a second life in Ghost as established in Six Skins. Yeah, so this is coming back to what I was talking about a moment ago. And why I think, and you've hit the nail on the head as to why I think this is a slightly different issue to what happened with Beric. Jon, I agree completely. The last words out of his mouth, the last word out of his mouth was ghost as he was being stabbed. And that clearly hints to me that he has walked into Ghost. You're right, he didn't feel the final blade. I think that he was walking into Ghost at that time. His body will be dead and killed. He will be alive and well in Ghost. Now, what we know from Varamys Six Skins is that over time, you do start to lose yourself. If you're walking into something, you do start to lose yourself in it. But I don't think that Jon's going to be in Ghost for a huge amount of time. What I think that we will see is, and this is very exciting, Jon's first chapter in The Winds of Winter, I think, will be actually a Ghost chapter, and we will see him as Ghost roaming around, and I think that is what is going to be happening there. So that, I think, is really exciting. I would highly recommend, and I've said this before, I would highly recommend that if you want an idea of what I think will happen, have a read of the Assassin trilogy by Robin Hobb. The first one is called Assassin's Apprentice. It's part of the Farseer, I think it might be the Farseer trilogy it's called, but there's this sort of trilogy of trilogies. And there is a character there who is called Fitz, who is a bastard. And he has this ability which is called the Wit, which connects him to dogs and wolves, and he can walk into them. And his character, I've said this before, so I don't think it's a huge spoiler, but I'd highly recommend the books. So his character's body dies, but he walks into a wolf. And what happens is that the body is then buried, and in order to bring him back, they have to try and tempt and coax his spirit, his life force, whatever it is, out of the wolf and back into his body. So that, I think, is what is going to happen with John, is that they're going to try and, he is going to be in Ghost, and he's going to have to be brought back from Ghost into his own body. What I think Melisandre will be doing is not that bit, because the whole walking element is beyond her, but she will be able to bring his body back to life, and I think that is what is going to be happening. It's going to be a lot more complicated than happened on the show. Donna Daly, thank you so much, saying, sorry, off topic, the Valyrians were historically slavers. After the Doom, the Targaryens were the only ones with weapons of mass destruction, yet gave up slavery. Why? It's a good question. So we're never really told about the Targaryens, that bit of the history. So Fire and Blood really picks up with the invasion. We don't get huge amounts about what happened with the Targaryens. What we know is that they decamped from Valyria, and they went to Dragonstone, and then they were at Dragonstone for like 100 years. Now, they clearly didn't practice slavery on Dragonstone. As for why, we're never truly told, to be honest, but what we are told is that the people who lived there sort of treated them like they were something special and bigger and better and all the rest of it. So almost like gods walking among men. And it was treated as a blessing to have one of the Targaryens sort of approach you and things like that. So they didn't really need it. It's probably the short answer, but we're not told exactly why. Maybe somebody just decided they didn't like slavery in the same way that Daenerys decided that she didn't like slavery, because, well, slavery is bad. But the honest answer is we're not told exactly why it was that they turned their back on slavery. They presumably had slaves when they were in Old Valyria, but when we get 100 years later and we get the invasion of Westeros, that certainly wasn't something that they brought across. So yeah, we don't know we don't know is the short answer. My best guess is that whoever was there at the time, leading up, or maybe even someone as late as Aegon, just decided to give it up because they didn't believe in it, didn't believe in the practice. And Andrew Kay saying that the Targaryens were one of the lowest ranked of the 40 Dragonlord houses. Can't imagine the 40th ranked house in Westeros equivalent. Yeah, so they're one of the least important of the most important Valyrian households, if that makes sense. But they probably still did practice slavery as well. Okay, let's quickly go back to a couple of questions from my patrons. This is another Maura Lee one saying, how do you see Euron getting defeated? Will it be by Yara Asher's hand versus Jaime on the show? Will Victarion have a hand? Or what? Right, so I think he won't die in the same way in the books as he did in the show. His character is, I'm not going to go over this ground too much. We've gone over this many times. His character in the books is hugely bigger and more important, and has ambitions, crazy ambitions. His ambition is to literally become a god. So that is what he is about. He's not just there to sort of support Cersei or anything like that. And the idea that he would try and gain some notoriety by being the person who killed Jaime Lannister, that's nothing like the book Euron. So how will he die? I like the idea that Asher Yara will be the one to finally kill him, because it works within this kind of the Greyjoy family. It sort of makes sense. As it stands, he hasn't yet got anyone else other than the Greyjoys who's got a natural arc that ends with some sort of retribution or face down with him in any way. So yes, as it stands, that seems to be the most logical. I have a feeling that he is going to end up being like, if we've got the scouring of the Shire kind of idea, in the scouring of the Shire, then you had to get rid of like the secondary baddie in this sort of penultimate chapter. I think that's going to be Euron. I think that he is going to be the person. And whereas we have Cersei being the main character that they have to defeat on the show, I think it'll actually be Euron, and she may technically be sitting on the throne, but I think that the real drive is going to be with Euron, not her. So that is where I see it currently going, and it may well end up being Asher Yara, or somebody else who finds that they've got a grudge against him because of something that he does in the next book. And you also asked more about Arya and Walder Frey. So my best guess, is that a lot of Arya's plotline in the Riverlands in season 7 is actually taking up Lady Stoneheart's plotlines in the books. I think that her vengeance against the Freys is going to be what she's going to be all about. Her storyline will come to an end when she discovers that actually not all of her family are dead as she feared they were. Her daughters are still alive, and Bran and Rickon weren't killed by Theon, things like that. So, but in the meantime, she does have to get vengeance for what happened at the Red Wedding, and I think it's going to be her who's going to be doing some equivalent of what Arya managed to achieve against the Freys. So that is where I think that the difference is, and I think Arya is going to linger a little bit longer in Braavos, and then rather than wander around the Riverlands killing people, she will then head up north straight to Winterfell, and then down to King's Landing. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions from my patrons, and then I will go back and see if there's any more in the chat. Now is the time to drop any more questions in the chat while I get to these last couple of questions. Alexandra Brown asking also about Nymeeria's pack, which I've answered already, I think. Then saying, will there be a Night's King or Night King in the books, in the confrontation between the living and the dead? I don't. The short answer is I don't think that they're going to create this character who is the Night King in the same way that the Night King was on the show. I don't think George R. R. Martin's going to do that. The showrunners were very clear that they created that character because they wanted to give a focus for what happened with the creation of the White Walkers. That meant having a character, and then they wanted that character to be the sort of the key, the hook to destroying the White Walkers. So they're very clear that that was their bit that they added on. Now, we have the character of the Night's King, who I think we will probably learn a little bit more, incidentally, about him in the spin-off, which I'm not going to talk about huge amounts here, but I think that we'll probably get a, maybe not in season 1, but if they move it through a few seasons, then I think we might start seeing a few hints about what's going on there with him. But he is this legendary character in the books, and I think that we will discover a little bit more about why the others were created. I think that they were created again by the Children of the Forest as they were on the show, but it's not they created one and then that one created lots of others. It's more they created the others as a race, as a species, and that is what we've got going on. So it's not going to be focused in on the one person. It's going to be more about the others as a whole. And then Henning J saying, "Hi Robert, do you think Stannis will die quickly in the Winds of Winter, killed by Brienne, or will he still have some further role to play?" Yeah, so it won't pan out exactly like it did on the show. For one thing, whereas Stannis is preparing for his equivalent of his fight against House Bolton that we saw on the show, he's currently camped in a crofters village not too far from Winterfell. Brienne is down in the Riverlands, so she's hundreds of miles away, so she is not going to be there doing what she did in the aftermath of that battle. So that's not going to happen. I think that there's a reasonable chance that Stannis will, or a good chance that Stannis will die, and that will allow Jon to be King of the North. But it's not going to be by Brienne sort of beheading him after that battle. There's a reasonable chance that they might squash some of the. We saw the Battle of the Bastards as well as the earlier Battle of Winterfell between Stannis's forces and the Boltons. There's a reasonable chance they might kind of that might be more sort of squashed together because what we have situation in the books is there is a lot of snow. Now, John's stickler for detail, and he will be very aware of what the impact of this amount of snow will be on the movements of people. So do not expect the same kinds of radical movements of people that we saw on the show, where you get Jon and Sansa and Davos just sort of dotting around all over the north, talking to people. The north is getting snowed in. Winterfell is so cold now. They've got, I think it said 40-foot ice or snow drifts. All but one of the gates have frozen shut. This is really, really bad conditions going on. It seems to be mostly centered around Winterfell, interestingly, but the whole of the north has got a lot of snow, and it's not going to be a matter of lots of armies moving around all over the place. There will just be one or two decisive battles going on. That is what the situation is. Stannis, however, as I said, I love the idea that he's going to survive for much longer, but I think he will survive for a bit and then he will die. Okay, I think those are my questions from my patrons. So let's just have a quick flick through to see some other questions going on in the chat. Actually, I just see that my while I have a quick look, moderators, thank you so much. Excellent job as always. My moderators are fantastic. Just keeping on top of the chat, making sure that there's no, during the season, no spoilers, and now just make sure there's no trolls coming in there. So thank you so much, moderators. I really appreciate it. Now, yeah, Bridget Walsh saying, I wish the others or the whites were as beautiful as they are said to be in the books. Yeah, so in the books, they are described a lot more like the sort of the classical elves or the fae folk or the she, the otherworldly, beautiful, ethereal, horrific and horrible, but at the same time, there's something magnetic and beautiful about them. So that is more how the others were described in the books. They didn't replicate that in the show. They made them a lot more sort of standard baddie looking, which fits in with a lot of the approach from the show. And I agree. I think that we will, in the books, we will have greater depth to them, which is shown partly by how they're described, I think, and also the language. I've seen a few people in the chat talking about the language. Yeah, they talk to each other. Scroth is the language of them, which is there. And yeah, people saying, hoping they have more character. Okay, guys, I'm trying to see any more questions. I can't spot anything immediately that we've got. So I think what I will do is I will start to draw this to a close now. For those, oh, actually, we just had a super chat come there, as always happens just when I'm about to draw to an end. Maura Lee, thank you so much, saying for Chrissy, the mods, and all the great folks in the chat. Thank you. Very generous, Maura. I really do appreciate it. And hi, Disputed Lands, who I see is out there. Guys, just coming up on my channel for those who want to know what's coming up next. You may have spotted, I am starting to branch out into a few things beyond A Song of Ice and Fire. I did my first video on Black Mirror last week. If you want to check that out, that's still up there. I'm going to be doing breakdowns, explanations of all of the Black Mirror episodes. So that's going to be about every other week or so. One of those is going to come out. But I'm going to be keeping up the A Song of Ice and Fire content. As I say, I've got my Tower of Joy video coming out next week. The Traveler's Guide is going to be carrying on every Friday. Over on the Well Told Tale, we're going to be moving into some H.P. Lovecraft as of next week, which I'm really looking forward to. Okay, guys, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic chat. If you are at all interested in other videos, live streams, particularly live streams with other content creators, then appearing somewhere around here, if you're watching this back later, will be a link to them. If you're at all interested in joining my Patreon community, getting access to things like my audio narrations from the pre-release chapters of the Winds of Winter, then there should be a link appearing somewhere up here if you're watching this back later. Donald Peoples, thank you so much. I just spotted that super chat saying, always a pleasure. Robert, great stream. Thank you. I very much appreciate it. Guys, I will be back this time next week where I've got a fantastic guest all lined up. So, guys, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon. Take care.